Hello, Mr. Ullman here, and this is your Almondcast on the transport systems of plants. Earlier in the course, you learned about how concentration gradients are so important in terms of being able to move materials across a membrane. Those same principles are harnessed by plants in order to be able to move water from the roots to the leaves and to be able to move nutrients from one part of the plant where they are stored to a part that needs them. So today you're going to need to unlock some of that knowledge about concentration gradients, about the movement of ions, about active transport, in order to be able to understand how it is that plants are able to support photosynthesis and how plants are able to ensure that needed materials get to the cells and the tissues where they are required. Plant physiology is fundamentally dependent upon movement of water. The water needs to move in from the roots through the stem and up to the leaves, not only because that's necessary for photosynthesis, but ultimately the structure of the plant depends on it. Plant cells have a large central vacuole, which is going to be mostly filled with water. As long as that vacuole is full, there is a pressure that is exerted by the cell on the surrounding cells, and that's going to allow the plant to become more rigid. That turgor pressure is important in order to be able to keep the plant upright. When those vacuoles lose water, that pressure decreases, the cell membrane sags away from the cell wall, and the plant wilts. Now, water potential is a topic that really is just an application of osmosis. And you learned in this course that osmosis is the movement of water from areas of lower solute concentration to places where there is more solute. That's going to create a pressure potential. In other words, it's going to be a way to move water towards the areas that are more highly concentrated in solutes. What plants do is to control their internal solute concentrations so that water will be driven up and into the plant from the surrounding environment, but they will also control their solute concentrations to ensure that nutrients like sugar get moved to areas that need them the most. We'll begin in the roots. Roots are hypertonic to the soil, and this is no accident. Remember that hypertonic is a condition where the solute concentration within the cell or tissue is greater than that of the surrounding environment. So roots, the cells of roots work very hard to ensure that there are high concentrations of nutrients present within the cells of the root. This is important not only because that is going to supply ions such as potassium and calcium and magnesium towards the cells in the plant that need them to be able to function, but also doing so creates an osmotic pressure that's going to move water up and into the root. The pictures here show some of the various transport methods by which that hypertonic solution is created. One of those is by creating a membrane potential. Protons are actively pumped using ATP out into the environment outside of the root, into the soil, in other words. That makes the interior of the root relatively negatively charged. Now, the surrounding soil is filled with lots of positively charged ions. Things like, again, potassium, calcium, magnesium are all positively charged ions. Now, those things will be attracted towards the negatively charged interior of the root, and thus that allows the roots to be able to hoard some of those positively charged ions. There's also co-transporters. So once those protons are stored up in the soil, there's a concentration gradient. Those protons, if allowed, will want to diffuse back in. But the pump that moves the protons into the cell is a co-transporter that will pull in a negatively charged ion such as nitrate along with the protons. And so that is a way to be able to lower the energy requirement necessary to be able to pull in some of those ions. As we move up to the leaves, we take a look at transpiration and the impact of transpiration on the movement of water through. So there is this kind of pushing from the roots, but now there's a pulling force that starts with what's happening at the leaves. Once you get a little bit off the ground, so for any larger plants, particularly as we look at bushes and trees, gravity counterbalances that root pressure that's generated. And so transpiration is going to explain why it is that water can continue its move up the trunk. So transpiration is the movement of water from the roots to the leaves and into the atmosphere. And this is a huge part of the water cycle because much of the H2O that's found in our atmosphere is actually transported there from a liquid to a gas, not by evaporation, but by the transpiration through plants. It's not easy to explain why water moves through a plant. The explanation is complex. It relies upon different aspects of both biology and chemistry, and it relies upon your ability to know what's going on in the root, the stem, and the leaf simultaneously to be able to work together to cause those molecules of water to get to the place where they need to be. As already covered in the root, because the root is hypertonic, there is an osmotic pressure, think of a positive pushing pressure in which water is going to be moving into the xylem here within the root tissue. As we move up into the stem, here the cohesional attraction of water towards other water molecules is very important. So you can see that the hydrogen bonding that occurs between water molecules ensures that as a water molecule a little bit higher up in the xylem moves upwards, the one that is behind it is going to have that attraction towards it and will be pulled along with it. Additionally, there is an adhesional attraction of the water molecules towards the cell wall of the xylem because of the hydrogen bonding that occurs between the polar water molecules and the polar cellulose molecules that make up the cell wall. And so the combined force there is going to, this transpirational pull is going to ensure that water continues moving up towards the leaves. Finally, once you get up into the leaf, then there is going to be the evaporation of water as water molecules moving from the xylem into the tissue of the leaf. Some of those will be used for photosynthesis, but many more are going to escape through the openings called the stoma in the base of the leaf. So that excess movement of water, because of that cohesional attraction, as one water molecule leaves, the water molecule that is behind it will be attracted towards it. The water molecule behind it will be attracted towards it. The water molecule back in the xylem will be attracted into the leaf. And so they play a game of follow the leader, as that hydrogen bonding is going to encourage the movement of water in the direction that the water molecules are ultimately flowing. And so it's really the combination together, a pull within the leaf, the cohesion within the stem, and the pushing that happens in the root. Those together are working to be able to effectively move water through that plant. Now, there is an ability for plants to be able to control the movement of water, particularly in terms of the rate at which water is going to transpire. And so the stomata are going to be the structures that are not open pores, but actually are structures that are controlled based on the conditions and needs of the plant. And so the opening and closing of the stomates is the way that plants can control both gas exchange and the rate of transpiration. So you can see in this image through a microscope that the stomata are actually very densely populated on the surface, not on the surface, but on the underside in particular of leaves. This is where the gas exchange is going to occur, and there can be many, up to thousands of these per square millimeter on the bottom of the leaf. Now, the density of that is something that varies based on species. So in particular, you would find that plants in drier climates are going to tend to have a lower stomatal density. So as we look at an animation here that depicts what's going on, we have the opening itself through which oxygen carbon dioxide and water primarily will flow. Now, surrounding that are two cells called guard cells. And when the guard cells are turgid, meaning their vacuoles are completely filled with water, the stoma are generally going to be oriented in an open position. Whereas when those vacuoles lose water and the cells are flaccid, that the stoma are going to be closed. And so when water is at a shortage within the plant, it's going to be important to slow down the rate of transpiration, because transpiration would cause a further loss of water, which could then be potentially additionally harmful or even fatal for the plant. Now, water loss can be prevented. Xerophytes are plants that have adapted to live in arid climates. So having spines is one way. So spines are modified leaves that we can see in things like cacti. And so those spines have extremely small surface area, which means that less transpiration will occur. Additionally, we can see that the spines here on this old man cactus are white, which is going to reflect sunlight, and as opposed to if the sunlight were absorbed, in which case it would be converted to heat, and that heat would drive or increase the rate of transpiration. There are behavioral adaptations. So, for example, being able to produce flowers and leaves only in time periods after rain. So you can see the leaves of the octillo here. So this plant grows leaves after rainfall. And so that when water is available, the leaves will photosynthesize. But once the plant dries up, those leaves are very small and they will fall off. And so you can see the leafless octillo here. It is not dead, it's actually just dormant, and it will sprout back to life and produce those leaves once it rains. Finally, you can see here an example of how the physiology of the plant in terms of the location of the stomates. So the oleander here is going to have these hairs that are going to reduce the rate of which water molecules are going to be lost, because as the gases are diffusing in and out through the stoma, those hairs within the crypt are going to actually trap the water molecules selectively, and that's going to slow down the movement of water from the leaf out into the surrounding air. So that deals pretty exhaustively with the movement of water through a plant. Now the movement of nutrients. Nutrients are moving primarily through the phloem, which is going to be kind of the sister transport tissue to the xylem. Now phloem is going to transport sap, and sap is going to be a sugar-rich, so heavy, very heavy in nutrients, along with water. And the purpose of the phloem is to transport these sugars to the rest of the plant. Now, the direction in which sugar needs to travel is actually flexible based on the time of year, the time of day, and various other factors going on between which parts of the plant are growing rapidly or not. Now, as sugar is produced in the mesophyll of the leaf, it is going to be loaded in the phloem through proton sucrose co-transporter proteins. So you can see that a proton pump is pumping protons in to the leaf. Then that sugar, along with those protons, will be pumped out and be pumped out into the phloem. Now, as the sucrose is being transported into the phloem now is going to be hypertonic relative to the xylem. And so water is going to move by osmosis into the phloem along with that sugar. That's going to create pressure, and that pressure is going to move the water with the sugar elsewhere to the place that has a lower pressure. And that place that has a lower pressure will ultimately be a place like another group of cells, a sink cell that needs and is going to take up that sugar, either because it needs to use it to be able to carry out cell processes, for example, the cells of the roots, or because this is going to be a place where the sugar is going to be stored. For example, in like the tuber of a potato is going to be a place where that sugar is going to then be stored up and converted into starch. Now, the movement of sap through phloem was actually first studied by looking at the mouth parts of a small insect called an aphid. Now, what aphids do is that they bite into the tissues of leaves, particularly into the phloem of leaves, and use their mouth to be able to soak up and drink some of the sap that is being transported by that leaf. And so by taking the mouth parts called the stylets of these aphids and making measurements of the rate at which sap accumulates at them in different parts of the plant, it was found that the stylets placed closer to the leaves would draw out sap much faster than those in the stem or those in the roots. And there we have it. Now you've learned a little bit more about how it is that plants are able to utilize both biological and chemical principles in order to be able to manipulate the movement of water and sugar from one part to another. And though it seems like a very basic thing for water to be drawn up into the leaves of a plant, there's actually a lot of sophisticated stuff going on within all the plants around you, and all of that is necessary in order for them to be able to maintain life. Remember that not all plants exhibit these parts. So the vascular plants are just kind of one slice of plant life, but all of these different parts are really magnificent adaptations which have allowed for really the dominance of these group of plants as a form of life across the earth as we know it. So thank you for listening. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know.